Let's get more now on the fallout from that report published by British intelligence group Janes yesterday that Russia had formally asked Indonesia to host its long-range jets in its easternmost province. Dr Matthew Sussex is an associate professor in strategic and defence studies at the ANU, and he joins us now. Dr Sussex, thank you for your time. There are accusations of recklessness over Peter Dutton's comments this morning from Labor. We know that Indonesia has assured Australia that Russian aircraft will not be based in their province. But can we bring it back to the claim? It's not entirely clear whether the approach was made by Russia. What's your take on this?
Yes, well, look, this is an interesting one because the way it was reported in Janes, the sort of defence publication, which tends to have a fairly good track record, is that it cited two people separately connected to the Indonesian government to say that this approach was made. And now subsequently, we've seen the Deputy Prime Minister, Richard Marles, saying, well, you know, these planes are not going to be based in Indonesia, but nonetheless being a little bit coy on whether the Russians actually did make the approach. Now, of course, Jakarta has denied that it even happened, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the idea wasn't floated at lower levels. And this, I think, is why there's a little bit of confusion about whether this was a formal proposal or whether it was something that was being conducted on the sidelines of the visit by the former Russian Defence Minister Sergei Shoigu to Indonesia in February this year.
And you'd probably have better insights about the source of this story, Janes. Is this a reputable source?
Yeah, look, Janes generally is fairly reputable. It outsources a lot of its content to experts, and often will lead on defence news. I think really the key takeaway from this is less that Russia may not have asked to base long-range aviation in Indonesia, but the fact that the Indonesians have said it's not going to happen, and that's a very, very good thing. But of course, this has actually happened before. In 2017, Russian long-range bombers used the exact same airbase that's at question in this story to conduct some reconnaissance flights. So the Russian government has had its sights set on Southeast Asia for a very long time to try and increase its military footprint, and particularly in recent years, it's put its attention to Indonesia, and especially so with a more Moscow-friendly government in the form of Prabowo's presidency in Indonesia.
And so if we consider for a moment the request was made, can you explain to us the location and facilities in that request, why Russia would want it and what sort of threat that would pose for Australia in the region?
Yeah, well, this is in the Indonesian province of Papua on an island, which is about 1,300 kilometres from Darwin. And you might think that that's a long way, but Russian long-range aviation can go for over 10,000 kilometres. And strategically, it will be quite significant because it would allow the Russians to perform ISR, which is intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance, over Australian military exercises that we hold often in the north. Certainly be able to get intelligence on our RAAF bases, including Tyndall, in the Northern Territory. And more than that, it would give the Russians the ability to effectively spy on American military activities coming out of Guam, and then also to the west into the Indian Ocean. So this is something that we really don't want in our region, particularly the case too, given the closeness of ties between Russia and China. The worry that the intelligence that Russian planes might get could be shared with Beijing as well.
And what do you make of the timing of this? I mean, the Janes report said Indonesia's defence minister received the request in February.
Yeah, the timing is interesting because Prabowo, when he was defence minister, went to Moscow. This was last year in July, and talked about Russia as a great friend. Then, upon taking office, the Indonesians and the Russians had joint naval exercises And then again, after this visit by the former Russian defense minister, now chief of their Security Council, Sergei Shoigu, to Indonesia. So I think this has been testing the waters in terms of how receptive Jakarta might be to increase defence ties with Moscow, and at the same time also coming when the United States has had its attention very much distracted by domestic affairs, with Donald Trump taking office just at the start of this year.
And how would this sort of request fit more broadly in terms of a strategic bloc with China?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that Russia is going to do anything to upset its relations with Beijing, particularly in the Indo-Pacific. But it does have incentives to increase its military presence here because, in terms of the relationship with Europe, that's basically done for the foreseeable future. So Russia needs to have a regional presence, and whether or not that means more joint exercises, more integration with Chinese forces is something I guess we're going to have to wait and see. It's certainly not an alliance, but it's really tilting very close to alignment.